It began in the boardrooms where ambition burned brighter than ethics, in the hushed conversations over late-night drinks where men and women in suits spoke not of innovation but of shortcuts, not of building but of bending. Business had always been a game, but for some it was a game where the rules were never meant to be followed, only exploited. And in that world, success did not belong to the smartest or the most diligent. It belonged to those who could cheat with the most convincing smile. The young entrepreneur had learned early that honesty was a luxury few could afford. Watching others claw their way upward, he saw how easily integrity was discarded like loose change, and how easily people forgave once money appeared on the table. At first, he cheated in small ways, exaggerating numbers on reports, inflating results to impress investors, cutting corners where no one was watching. Each deception was a seed, and each lie that went unpunished fed the roots of something darker. Soon, he discovered that once the first step was taken, the next one was always easier. The investors applauded him for his vision, not knowing that the vision was built on doctored spreadsheets and polished presentations that sparkled with half-truths. The employees followed him, inspired by his charisma, unaware that he was siphoning off their loyalty to cover the cracks in his empire. Competitors admired him, some even envied him, never realizing that he was bribing the very inspectors sent to keep his empire in check. And the public? The public loved him most of all, seeing in him a symbol of the modern dream, the proof that anything was possible if you worked hard enough. But the truth was simpler: anything was possible if you cheated hard enough. The deeper he went, the more he realized that the system itself rewarded deception. Regulations were riddled with loopholes, watchdogs could be bought with donations, and media could be dazzled with access. If a story arose questioning his methods, it was easy enough to bury it under piles of advertising dollars or charm the journalist into silence. The line between truth and fiction blurred so completely that even he began to believe in the illusions he had spun. He convinced himself that his lies were necessary, that without them, the company would collapse, and with it, the jobs of thousands who depended on him. It was not greed, he told himself, but responsibility. But beneath the glamour and applause, cracks began to spread. Whispers circulated in the industry, murmurs of deals that seemed too convenient, partnerships that felt too one-sided, numbers that didn't quite add up. A competitor, once a friend, began asking questions. An employee, tired of broken promises, decided loyalty no longer outweighed conscience. Even as the empire expanded, the foundations trembled, not with failure, but with the weight of secrets too heavy to keep buried forever. When the reckoning came, it was not sudden. It arrived in fragments, in questions that grew louder, in reports that could no longer be ignored, in auditors who refused to be bought. The empire that had been built on deception collapsed with the same speed it had risen, the fall made all the more spectacular by the height from which it came. Investors turned their backs. The media that once praised him now tore at him with a vengeance, and those who had once applauded his daring now spat his name like a curse. Yet even in ruin, he found a dark sort of victory. For though his empire lay in ruins, he had already tasted the sweet fruit of success, lived the life of a king, and for a time, fooled the world into believing he was what he claimed to be. The money may have been seized, the reputation destroyed, but he had cheated his way to the top, and for a fleeting moment, he had stood there, basking in the applause of the world. And so the story lingers, whispered in boardrooms and echoed in quiet conversations where ambition still claws at the edges of morality. It is a reminder that success in business often has two faces, the one that smiles for the cameras and the one hidden in the shadows, where the real deals are made and the rules are rewritten. For every empire that shines, there is a question left hanging in the air. Was it built on brilliance, or was it just another triumph of deception? Among those caught was the loyal employee, a young analyst who had believed in the dream from the very beginning. She had worked nights long after others had gone home, crunching numbers that never seemed to balance, smoothing over inconsistencies that whispered of something darker. At first, she told herself it was only inexperience, mistakes that needed correction. But the deeper she looked, the clearer it became. The numbers were not meant to balance because they had been built on sand. Her loyalty, once unwavering, began to erode. She faced a choice: stay silent and protect her career, or speak out and risk being swallowed by the very empire she helped build. In another corner of the city, a journalist had been watching. He had written glowing features about the entrepreneur in the past, dazzled by the story of rags to riches, the magnetic rise of a man who seemed unstoppable. But small details began to bother him: an unanswered question in an interview, a contradiction between reports, a source who suddenly refused to speak. The more he pulled at the threads, the more tangled they became, until he realized the story was not one of triumph, but of illusion. And with that realization came the hunger to expose the truth, not just for the sake of justice, but to prove that he could not be fooled like the rest of the world. Then there was the rival. Once a partner, he had shared drinks with the entrepreneur, signed deals in the same smoke-filled rooms, even laughed at the same half-truths. But partnerships in business are fragile things, and when his own company began to crumble under the weight of the other's rising empire, bitterness grew into something sharper. He knew where the bodies were buried, because he had helped dig some of the graves. When the moment came, he was ready, not with honesty, but with revenge. His hands were not clean, but in exposing his rival's sins, he washed himself in the illusion of righteousness. The fall was not a single blow, but a storm from all sides. The employee leaked documents, the journalist published his exposé, and the rival whispered to regulators who had already begun to suspect. The empire cracked, then crumbled, the applause of the crowd replaced by the roar of condemnation. Cameras flashed, not in admiration, but in hunger for the downfall of the man they had once celebrated. And through it all, the entrepreneur stood tall, even in handcuffs, even as his world disintegrated. For there is a strange power in deception. Even when the lie is exposed, the shadow of its success lingers. People remember not only the fall, but the glory that came before it. Some still admired him, even in disgrace, whispering that at least he had dared, at least he had played the game in a way no one else could. Others condemned him, vowing never to be fooled again. But time is a way of softening anger, and new empires always rise, some honest, some not, and the cycle repeats. Business is built on ambition, and ambition often hungers for shortcuts. Cheating your way to the top may destroy you in the end, but for those moments at the peak, under the blinding lights, with the world applauding and the money flowing, the temptation remains too strong to resist. And so the story continues, in new faces, new companies, new boardrooms where deals are made with handshakes and smiles that hide the sharp teeth beneath. The empire's collapse did not happen in silence. It was messy, violent in its own way, tearing through lives like a storm that spared no one in its path. For the entrepreneur, it was the stripping away of illusions, his name dragged through headlines, his face plastered on screens, not as a visionary, but as a fraud. Yet even as the world turned on him, a small part of him refused to feel regret. Regret, he thought, was for those who never dared. The loyal employee, the one who had leaked the truth, found herself in a strange place. At first, she was hailed as a whistleblower, the brave soul who had exposed corruption from within. But admiration quickly gave way to suspicion. Questions were asked. Why had she stayed so long? Had she not benefited from the very lies she now condemned? The same voices that praised her integrity now whispered doubts about her complicity. She discovered that truth-telling in business is never clean. It stains those who speak it just as much as those who conceal it. The journalist, on the other hand, basked in the glow of vindication. His articles spread like fire, earning him awards, interviews, and recognition that had eluded him for years. Yet the victory left him uneasy. For in the process of tearing down a titan, he realized he had built another myth, that of himself as a relentless seeker of truth. He had exposed lies, yes, but he had also shaped them into a narrative that the public would devour, trimming away complexities to deliver a story that fit neatly into headlines. In chasing the truth, he had created his own version of it, one that was no less selective than the lies he sought to destroy. And then there was the rival. The man who had once shared deals and laughter with the fallen entrepreneur now strutted in his absence. He painted himself as the survivor, the man who had weathered the storm because he had chosen honesty over deceit. Yet those who knew him better recognized the hypocrisy in his words. He had cheated too, only more carefully, leaving fewer traces, ensuring others bore the blame. His company rose in the shadow of his rival's collapse, not because he was cleaner, but because he was cleverer at hiding his sins. The world moved on quickly. Markets shifted, new businesses rose, investors searched for the next dazzling story. The empire that had once been called untouchable became a cautionary tale, another name in the long list of scandals that shaped the history of commerce. For the entrepreneur, prison walls replaced boardrooms, and the echo of applause gave way to silence. Yet even there, in the cold confines of a cell, he carried the memory of his reign. He remembered the flashing lights, the handshakes with world leaders, the moments when he had bent reality to his will. The world could take everything from him, but it could not take away the fact that, for a time, he had won. The story of cheating your way to the top is never just about profit and loss, never just about greed or ambition. It is about the fragile line between success and ruin, about how far people are willing to go when the prize gleams bright enough. It is about the shadows behind the spotlight, the costs borne not only by those who cheat, but by those who follow, who believe, who clean up the mess left behind. And somewhere in another city, another boardroom, another late-night meeting over drinks, someone else was already sketching the outlines of a new empire. They had watched the rise, studied the fall, learned the mistakes. They told themselves they would be smarter, faster, more discreet. They told themselves they could cheat without ever being caught. The game continued because it always does, and the dark side of business success has a way of drawing in new players, eager to take their place at the top, no matter the cost.